I'll just hand over to Ian Bousfield and Denis Wick. Okay. Yeah, okay, me to serve. This was actually my idea, but having had the idea and I'm now sitting here, I don't know what I'm going to say, because I haven't planned anything. I deliberately didn't plan anything because about twice a year I call one of my heroes up. I have two trombone-playing heroes. One is sitting next to me, and the other one, unfortunately, passed away recently. He's Don Lusher. They were my two heroes when I was a kid. And I've based, I think, everything that I do on the trombone on how they played. It's a bit of a strange mixture to have the sound of Denis Wick in the middle and low register in your head and the sound of Don Lusher when you go into the high register, and it's caused me a lot of problems over the years. But that is kind of like my basic setting as to how I hear things. And about twice a year I call Denis up for a quick chat. And a couple of hours later, I'm very, very refreshed and enthused by Denis's, just his enthusiasm for life, still his enthusiasm for trombone playing. And I'm very, very much aware that so much of our heritage disappears. One generation tends to have this wish to erase the last generation in the foolish thought that what was is not as good as what is. And if you spend a little time listening to historic recordings of American orchestras, of English orchestras, of people like Robert Isley, who was Arthur Pryor's successor, you'll realize that there are a lot of things that the previous generations could do that we no longer can. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to place on record, because this is being recorded for the archives, Denis's views on several things. He doesn't know what I'm going to ask. He has no idea. But the reason why I wanted to do this is because I'm not known for my diplomacy, and I'm unlikely to ask the questions like, what kind of mouthpiece do you use? And, or where were you born, and, that kind of thing. So, right, cut to the chase. Denis, you are one of the 3 most successful trombone teachers in the world, and I've had the great honour of sharing a class with you here for 8 years now, and I've learnt so much. The other 2, in my opinion, are Joe Alessi and Branimir Slokar, based on pure number of people who have gone into jobs. Can you give us something on your philosophy of teaching? Because, sorry, I'll shut up in a minute and let him say something. But I come on the other end of it. I have students who study with me and study with Denis. Now, Denis doesn't play the trombone anymore, apart from still having the best top F in this room. That's the only note he tends to play these days, and he's still very depressing. And so I say to students who've made a marked improvement, I said, this is really, since I've been away 3 weeks and you've improved, what did Denis say to you? And they said, nothing, he just tells us a few stories. And I said, well, he can't not be telling you anything. How can you get better without him actually using some system on your... No, really, just tells us a few stories about how he's in the LSO. But there's a hook in every story. And somehow those students finish up sounding like you used to play. They play with your articulation, your sound, your legato. How do you do it?
I thought this might happen. And it's an interesting one, because for me, the music is the boss, the technique is the servant, and these are platitudes, forgive me for that. But you have to create the music somehow, and because I was completely self-taught, I didn't have a lesson in my life. Well, I mean, I paid for some lessons, but I didn't actually get any. And I had to analyse it. My system was basically, it sounds like a politician's answer, you answer another question. My system was basically theft. I stole everybody's good ideas. And if somebody could do something better than me, which they certainly could, I would acquire it. So I listened, for instance, to Edwin Watkin producing the Pianissimo, which was absolutely fantastic. And I copied it, and I did it, so that I can always do it. Ray Premaru, sound in the low register. Yes. Don Lusher, in the high register. The same kinds of things. You could call it theft if you like, but nobody suffered from it, and I certainly gained. So far as the business of working with students, I find that the wheel is still remarkably circular. You don't need to reinvent it. And the things that worked donkey's years ago still work now. I do actually demonstrate a little bit and show the things that, like pianissimo production, okay, high register, all that sort of stuff. But it's basically getting them to understand what the music is about, and trying to put themselves in the situation where they're singing through the instrument. They're actually making the instrument work as an extension of their personality. And of course they're all different. And, you know, being immature is something we all grow out of eventually, or some of us anyway. And it's a continuing fascination because every case is different. You can't make rules. But if you can find out what people can do well, and then work at that, find out what they can do badly or they find really difficult, and they very often shame-faced about it, and find a mechanical way to do it. That's really how I got onto equipment design, because you can change the human being, but you can't change the relationship of tapers and metal parts.
Can I just butt in there and hold you back on something you just said? Because I found this myself, where we've both been presented with a student. It's almost in the same week. In the first week in September, someone turns up. Yes. And both of us make the same judgment call, if you like, as to what we're going to do with that student.
Yes.
Now, in most cases, we agree.
Yes.
And in other cases, we disagree, but after a week, I eventually agree with you anyway, because what you've done's worked. And that point of picking on a student's strengths rather than going in on the weaknesses. How do you, for example, take somebody that there are those odd cases of someone who has a naturally good high register, but a bit of a unique embouchure that doesn't quite work that well. The middle and low register sounds a bit ropey, you know, and you get air balls and that kind of thing. Now, I know that your system is to work on their high register. Now, can you explain that?
Well, to get them to do what they do well, better. And so it gives them confidence, it enables them to understand. See, I think there should be a short circuit between here and here, cutting out the brain if at all possible. I mean, some people haven't got all that much to cut out. But if you can make it instinctive, people that get this far are all musicians or they wouldn't be there. And they have a lot of instinct, a lot of good instinct. And if you can get them to relate to what they want to do, to what they are doing, and not to have to think about every little thing. Make it as natural as possible. And the business of making the embouchure work properly, and very often it's to do with equipment. You know, you get somebody playing on a mouthpiece that will give them a wonderful sound. You can't make a bad sound on this mouthpiece. It's too good. And it will cover up the things that you should be doing better. So you suggest a mouthpiece which will not help them, and in fact they don't sound nearly as good. Now, if you can make that sound good, your chops are working properly. And the old remedy of practicing in front of a mirror, corners down, relax, or as Schulte said, relax.
Can I push you back on this point? Sorry, I'm going to make you work here. It's all right. Because this is, like I said, this is the phone conversation. Just imagine you're sort of listening in. There's an am I fine phone tap or whatever. But that point of the, in inverted commas, correct embouchure, where do you stand? Where do you stand on this? Because there are the two schools of teaching. There's the one school of teaching that says the face is correct or it doesn't work. And there's the other one that says if I get a student thinking musically, I don't care what it looks like.
Well, it has to be the former, I think. I mean, in the old days, nobody knew anything about it. And it was something you didn't discuss.
Yeah.
It's like somebody's intonation or their driving. You didn't discuss. I mean, See, I believe that anybody can play properly, anybody can play well, anybody can play if they let the muscles work for them. And if you think about the way a small child looks when asleep, a baby, for instance, the corners are down. It's relaxed. And it should be relaxed. And if you started, and I've thought about this a great deal, I haven't taught many beginners. The last beginner I taught just walked out.
Who was that?
That was Steve. He's 54 now, so it was a long time ago. If you can get it right, if you can make it as natural as possible, if you have to tie yourself into knots in order to make the thing work at all, there must be something wrong. And the more relaxed you are, the more easily you can arrive at where you were. Because you're not doing anything. You just let it happen. You just relax completely, put it on your face, and try to do that. And that's the beginning. And then after that, it's a refinement, it's a question of balancing the muscular structures, it's a question of listening and sometimes looking. And when you look in the mirror and it looks right, it usually sounds right. But I do it the other way. If it sounds wrong, that's pejorative. If it is less than perfect for any reason in any area, then look at it as well as listen to it. And when it sounds right, it looks right. So I don't believe in saying you must do this, but I do believe in saying it must sound like this.
Yeah.
And when it's natural, when it's easy, you get the results. You get the encouragement. The student enjoys it more. The student practices more. The student gets better.
Yeah.
And most of the work, I'm very kind what you said about my working with students. It's great for me at my age to get out of the house and do something, you know. I still keep working, and I don't intend to stop. If you listen to the sound, you make the music is the boss, the technique is the servant. And whatever you have to do, you need to do. But of course we know that the less you do, the less stress you have, and the more natural it is, the better it works. The most important thing is listening. I mean, you can make it sound really complex, but it isn't. It's really very simple.
And what do you think to the talent base that you have that walks through the door every week at the Academy now compared to what you found 40 years ago?
40 years ago, yes, it's actually 40, you're right, 40 years, since I started teaching at the Guildhall School, 1967. At that time, there was Sid Langston at the Academy, and there was Maurice Smith at the Royal College. And they used to say that Sid wouldn't, and Maurice couldn't. And there was more than a grain of truth in all of that. And the system was that the Royal College used to recruit guardsmen who were good players. It was at the time of national service or not long afterwards, and you'd have good players who'd come from brass bands who were playing in the army guards bands, where the standard was always very high. And by getting them into the Royal College and showing them the difficult bits and how the repertoire could be played and the style, it's exactly what these boys needed, and exactly what the college needed, so that they got free lessons in return for playing in the orchestra. This, as far as I was concerned, was the establishment, and it was what was completely different from me because I was the kid from nowhere. At the Academy, there was Sid teaching or not teaching. He made it his business not to teach. He didn't actually actively mislead people, but he told me many years later when he was playing with the LSO, it's not that many years later I suppose, but I suppose 6 or 7 years later, why should I tell these kids my secrets? They'll be doing my work next week. And, you know, okay, I had a scholarship and I was here and I was listening. The best thing he ever did for me was to let me hear him play, which he did by accident, because I sat with him in the first orchestra and played second trombone, and I learned more in 10 minutes than I'd ever learned from him with words. Having said that, I then had a rush of talent to the Guildhall School. The Bush Telegraph was effective then as it is now. And although it's on the internet then, it was National Youth Orchestra, it was the best young players, and we had 30 applicants for 4 places every year at the Guildhall School, and boy, they were good. We actually had to take more sometimes because it was unfair to the ones that we didn't let in. They were always good. And those people are sitting in the orchestras, or have sat in the orchestras now. And it was fantastic for me because I had the material. And because I was self-taught, I'd analysed everything, I knew how to do it, from bitter experience, because I had to teach myself. I mean, there's no better way of finding out than having to learn from yourself. So it spread. And in those days, I think the talent was... rose-coloured spectacles, okay, I can't pretend they were all good. Of course they weren't. But the less able ones were helped by the more able ones. Mm-hmm. And people like Dudley Bright, Eric Trees, Steve Saunders, and so on. There were the lesser lights that learned from them. And so the general sort of middle level was higher than I mean, it was absolutely wonderful. But today, I think there are reasons why the talent isn't as good as that. I mean, there are good players, of course there are. But when you consider that my friends, those that are, actually next month I've got 2 anniversaries. One is 51 years since my first concert with the LSO, and the other is 20 years since I left. And those guys are getting paid now roughly what they got paid 20 years ago.
That's right. When I left, it hadn't really gone up.
Yeah. And it's very, very sad. And the people who can really think, the people who are going to be the great players of the future, they've got a choice. Well, you could go and work in a merchant bank and make about 3 times what you could make as a musician. It happens. It happens. And, I feel that something needs to be done. This has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Something needs to be done on a national level. The cost of 1 centurion, or whatever the tank is now, will keep the LSO going for 5 years. The military budget is billions, and we're not talking about much. We're talking about a tiny amount for this beacon of culture that the LSO and the other orchestras are. The quality of the playing in the London orchestras now is probably better than it's ever been. It's certainly different from what it's ever been, but the quality of the string playing, for instance, in the LSO is infinitely better than it was in my day.
It is interesting there, the difference between the role that music has in society, or classical music has in society in this country, and what I see in Austria. In Austria, the arts budget is almost discussed on the same table as the health budget. Yes. And the director of the opera house in Vienna could get away with saying, opera is as important as health. Don't dismiss it. And it really does have that central role within society. In this society, it doesn't, therefore it's not funded.
Yes, but you said an interesting word. You said classical.
Well, in Austria, it really still pretty much is that,
Yes, but you don't call it classical in Austria.
No, it's just
you call it
music, yeah. Yeah.
That's the difference. And where, in my not so long ago memory, music was music, and pop music was pop music. Now it's called music, and what I call music is now called classical music. And it's the wrong word. It should be called classified. Classified music. And you think about what that means, and that's the true sense of it, I think. Somebody write that down.
It's all right, we're recording it.
Okay, you could say it's a result of education, which it undoubtedly is. It's a result of tradition, which it undoubtedly is. But we're talking now about the hopes and aspirations of the students that we get, or that we don't get.
Do you find the students work harder now or less hard than they did 40 years ago?
Less hard.
Yeah. It's something that I have to say, if I were ever to take a trombone class in Austria or in Germany, I suspect most of my students would be Bulgarian, Romanian, Ukrainian, and from that area in southern Spain around Valencia. Because unfortunately, if you're born with nothing, you tend to work a lot harder. And I know from the experience with my own children, trying to get them work when they're born with computers and Game Boys and, the television always on and always, the presents that they want, which is something that I think the previous generations here didn't necessarily have. And this is something that I've really found. If you look at Branimir Slokar's class in Freiburg, that's about 2/3 Eastern European now.
Yeah, that's right.
He has a couple of Germans in there, but basically it's Eastern European because they work.
Yes.
Boy, do they work.
Yeah. And in my case, I had to. There was no question. I didn't have anything. Had no money. My first date in the Bournemouth Orchestra when I was 19, I needed a dinner suit and I didn't have one. And this sounds terrible, but it's all true, and it's part of history. My mother scoured the second-hand shops in Luton to try to find a dinner suit for me, and she found one for £2. There was a hole in the trousers which was repaired by the New Invisible Mending Company for £10 shillings, 50 pence. So and I paid her back out of my first week's earnings. And that's the way it was then. I worked all the time. I never stopped working. I discovered La Fosse when I was about 17. If you don't know La Fosse, get it. It'll make you play twice as well. I taught myself to play, and I read every word, laughed at the translations, and did everything it said, right or wrong. And it made me into a player. I had to do it, and I wanted to do it, and I enjoyed myself tremendously. But I can't see anybody else doing that now.
No.
For one thing, I don't need to.
No. Okay. Desert island discs question, but slightly different. You're going on a desert island, you can take one trombone with you and one mouthpiece. So which Denis Wick mouthpiece would you take with you for a start? and which trombone?
Well, I would take for the trombone the first one that I bought in 1958 at the Brussels Trade Fair, when it was illegal to import them. It was a vintage, by now, Con 8H. And I'd take the mouthpiece, and I still got the very first one I ever made, which was about 1965, I suppose, my original A model, because that's got so many memories. And that's where it all began. And, after that my life changed, and it's never been the same since.
And what do you think of that monster that you created that moved Denis Wick away from being first trombone in the London Symphony Orchestra to that being your hobby and you being a professional businessman?
I think you have to be honest about your instincts. And there are some people that, like me, I can't help being a businessman. I just see things that way around. It doesn't mean to say that I ever did anything with the sole motivation of making money. I never did. Never. Everything I did was for a musical reason, and the money came, well, that's nice. The business happened by accident. Well, I told you the story, right?
Yeah, but you haven't told these guys.
Okay.
I've heard this one once or twice.
1960-something. The LSO is what's called a workers' cooperative. It was formed in 1904, and it's still a workers' cooperative, with all the pluses and minuses that represents. There was a 9-member board of directors, 3 of whom were elected and still are every year. For some reason, and probably because the level of string playing was so dreadful, in order to get players in after the war, they had to offer them membership, because there was a tremendous competition for the few players that there were, and they had players that maybe wouldn't have been there under any other circumstances. And when all those players retired, the level of string playing, which you've heard, absolutely erupted, because the younger players were almost always better. There were good players, of course there were. But for some reason, the string players in the LSO thought they needed to protect each other. And so there was always a majority of string players on the board of directors. And for them, it was their greatest achievement. They couldn't make the front desk, maybe not even the second desk. But they could be elected by their peers to stand up for them, to represent their interests.
It's still the same now. Can I just give you might enjoy this. In Austria, we have a word for them. We call them the coalition of the weak.
Yes. Auf Deutsch?
Coalition der Schwachen. In very bad Wienerish. There you go.
Yeah. So, for whatever reason, there were squabbles. There were squabbles all the time, because we hired the conductors, we organised the programmes with the conductors with the best recording contracts got the work. That was the beginning and end of it. And people were elected or chosen as conductors for completely the wrong reasons. Lots of stories about that, but that's not really this is not really the time for it. But I was getting so up to here with the LSO, and I talked to Jay Friedman, who's still a good friend, 45 years later, and he said, "Why don't you come and work in America?" So I said, "Well, I can't be a member of AFM. I mean, you've got to be a member of the American Federation of Musicians in order to work in America." No, he says, "They're teaching jobs. They're good teaching jobs. There's one I know about right now." Really? My grasp of geography has never been a total weakness. It's never been very good. But she said, "Okay, look, there's a job going in Madison, Wisconsin. There's a professor of low brass, and I bet they'll pay you what you make in the LSO, and the cost of living is probably a bit less." So I went and played. We were in Daytona Beach, and they flew me up from Daytona Beach, and I took Audrey, and we went there, and Frank Lloyd Wright was the great architect, and we saw Frank Lloyd Wright houses, and marvellous, let's do it. The three kids thought it was wonderful. They thought America was like Daytona Beach because they'd been there twice. And nobody told them that, or me, that the 3 seasons in Madison, Wisconsin are July, August, and winter.
Have you seen Jeremy laughing at the fact that anyone would enjoy going to Daytona Beach there? You know?
I mean, it's very interesting. So I was going to America. They held a job open for a year, and in the end we didn't go, but it was nice of them. And they wanted to start a British-style brass band. They knew that it existed, didn't know much about it, and there were instruments which you couldn't buy in America. So, could I help them? Yeah, sure. So I went to Bousfield Hawks. Now, my history with Bousfield Hawks was that we played these dreadful imperial trombones with no high-sec musician, B natural, for instance, and a terrible slide action, and that was before the embargo was lifted, because one of the directors of Bousfield Hawks was on the board of trade, and it was sheer protectionism. We knew it was. So nobody had any good thoughts about Bousfield Hawks. I went there with, so I tried the baritones and I tried the tenor horns, and they existed. That's about all I can say. And the managing director in his mauve suit and his pink tie came down the steps. And, very nice to see you. Why don't you use our instruments in the LSO? So I said, there's the short answer, which is not very polite, and there's the long answer, which will take a long time. So, a cup of coffee and a lot of talk later, and they asked me if I would help them design a trombone, which is the original sovereign, the first sovereign instrument they made in 1968. The Model 930, should any of you ever see one. And it was nothing special, but we did it. And I went down there because I lived not too far away, and I went down there once a week, and I kept saying no. And eventually I said, maybe. And eventually I said yes. And they made an instrument. And at that time I'd been experimenting for the LSO, playing in the LSO, making a mouthpiece that would actually do what I wanted. Now, I used you know about mouthpieces. I'd used about 4G for 7 years, and I could do everything on it. High G was a little bit scarce, but it was all there. But of course, in soft playing, the sound was too anonymous. It had this sort of... Jan Tagarais described it as audible mud, and I think that's very apt. And for loud playing, it was fantastic, but for soft playing, it could have been anything. And so I designed the mouthpiece that I designed. It took forever, and I got it right in the end. Which is another saga, but I got it right in the end. And they said at Bousfield, "We understand you've made a mouthpiece. Would you like to sell it to us to put with our instrument?" Yeah, great. Yes, okay. They offered me about a third of what I was getting for them, but that's fine because I sold 10 times as many. And that's where it began. 1 mouthpiece, then 2, then 5, then 7, and 1 for the euphonium, 1 for the bass trombone, 1 for a jazz trombone, 1 for tenor horn, a whole lot of mouthpieces for the cornet. I found a marvellous cornet player that had the most gorgeous sound, played on a miniature bass trombone mouthpiece, which he'd invented. And we worked together on it. We made all these things happen. So that was a kind of cumulative thing.
And at which point in all of this did you buy your first Jaguar?
Quite late, actually.
I told you I wasn't a diplomat, didn't I?
It was quite late. You see, I didn't make that much money. I did all right, of course, but see, money was never the motivation.
No.
The idea was to solve the problem. How could we do it? How could we make this mouthpiece for jazz trombone players that would not sound ugly in the high register, that would really centre on the high E flat and the high E natural?
Yeah. I think I can vouch for this because I've known Denis for such a long time, and as you can see, he's sort of a bit of a hero to me, and I've picked his brain so much. I really feel that your motivation in all of this has never been financial. You wake up with this incredible enthusiasm for life and whatever you do every day. Every time that I've seen you, you've always been brimming with enthusiasm, as you are now, and it's an inspiration to me. You know. So
well, that's nice of you to say so. But you see, I think there are problems to be solved, and with teaching, with everything, you use what experience you have to make it work. Eventually, when you're talking about playing, you've got to do something with bits of metal, because the human body can't do everything. And the human body can adapt to anything, but the relationship between the mouthpiece and the instrument you can't change. And so that is part of the equation that you have to get right. So that's what I did. But the answer to the question about the Jaguar was 1988, and I had to wait a year and a half for it, and I never had as many problems with the car. Really. And it was a funny thing because we saw Jaguars on every motorway. It was the car of choice.
The bonnet up.
No, but it was the car of choice. You know, when people, the company directors got cars from the company, that was what they drove. And I think I'd had Volvos before that, which were Swedish and stolid and solid and reliable. But you're right, the bonnet was up more. It had. You couldn't imagine. Just wonder what would go wrong next. They were very nice about it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Cars. Yeah. All right. Okay. Cars. All right. There have been. Actually, I have an anniversary coming up. In the middle of March, I will have been a first trombone player 25 years. I always find it very interesting when I go to America, as I'm described as this young, up-and-coming first trombone player. Which is very nice, but I've been a first trombone player 25 years now.
I remember the first one. You called me, and you said, you've been offered the first trombone job in the Halle Orchestra. It was the end of your first term at the Guildhall School.
That's right, yeah.
And I said, look, I know I did this, but things are different now. You know, there are so many things going at the Guildhall School. And, you know, I think, you know, I'd hang on for a bit.
I have to say I regret the decision now. I do. After 25 years, I regret the decision of going to the Halle when I was 18. Because when I think of the sort of line that you and Peter wanted to send me down, was the idea of developing myself as much as I could at the Guildhall and then going to the Paris Conservatoire or to Juilliard. And then doing the competition route, which you were desperate to push me into this competition route of Geneva and Munich and all this kind of thing, and I just sort of wanted a, you know, 3-bedroom semi and a Ford Fiesta, you know.
Yeah, but didn't we all? Yeah. We all did at that time.
Yeah, you know, that was it. Like, I really kind of regret that I never developed myself as much as I could have. But having said that, I might not be sitting in the greatest orchestra in the world now had I not done that.
Yeah, what you did. I mean, this. Forgive me. I must tell you this story. One of these phone conversations, and he said, "There's a job going in Vienna." So I said, "Oh yes," and I'm thinking of going for it.
Can I just I'll stop you right there? Just a bit of background information. See that big, handsome Austrian man at the back there? Hans, it's his fault because he was pestering me to go to Vienna. I know you are.
The rest of this conversation was, well, have you, you know, they play opera all the time. That's the main job. The Vienna Philharmonic is taken from the Vienna Opera. There are 149 players in the opera, and from there, the members are the Vienna Philharmonic. So I said, have you played any opera? And he said, well, we recorded, and I can't remember what it was, but a few recordings, but never. I said, okay. So I said, verstehen Sie Deutsch? He said, what? So I said, okay, well, this sounds interesting. But, so he goes and auditions for it. And he gets it. He against all the odds. Now, you don't know this, but the intendant, the orchestra manager of the Gustav Mahler Eugen Orchestra, where I have worked now 15 years, I'm the only Brit. Well, most of the others were Berlin Philharmonic and Vienna Philharmonic. He was a trombone player. I didn't even know this. And he told me something. Don't blush. He told me something. He said, when this guy first joined the orchestra, he went to the opera and heard you play. And he said, in the first week, the trombone section were transformed. In the first month, the entire brass section was transformed. In the first 3 months, you could hear the difference in the entire orchestra. Now, that's an extraordinary thing to say for an orchestra with such a fantastic tradition for so long. But I said it, and it's true.
Okay, you said it. All right. Hans is probably going to disagree with you later, but there you go.
but it's very interesting. This guy was a trombone player, and he wasn't listening with anybody's ears. I don't think he was a very good trombone player, actually. But he was there, and we had a conversation.
Okay.
And, see, what I thought was, this is our latest export. As you may know, I've been very keen on exporting.
You're going to get back onto the Jaguars again in a minute, aren't you?
No, but
yes.
It's true. It's part of our culture. And your playing goes back a long way. It's not just
No,
what I
true.
put in. It's what you had before that.
Yeah. It's okay. I won't start talking about wine. It's the same as terroir in wine. You can taste the soil that the wines come from. You know, when an English trombone player plays something, you can feel the tradition going back 100 years, not 10 years. You know, you can feel that sort of like a cumulative effect. I have 2 special moments in my life as a trombone player that I think that when I retire, I think I will always remember. The first is playing Mahler 3, the first time in Vienna in 2001 with Pierre Boulez, on that kind of crucible atmosphere of the Vienna Philharmonic Sunday morning concert, which is like a religious experience. It takes 20 years to get a season ticket, so don't hold your breath. And that was one thing that it was a kind of an out-of-body experience that was beyond anything to do with nerves. It was just such a special experience for me that actually I'm playing Mahler 3 again with the orchestra in August, but I don't really care if I never play it again because that was just so special, and we recorded it as well, of course. Yeah. And then a couple of years ago, you know, all of those times where you practice chorales or, you know, you work on things with the section, and we did Mahler 2 in Concerthaus in Vienna, also with Pierre Boulez. And Hans says the same, that was maybe the most beautiful thing that had ever happened in a trombone section, you know, in my 25 years. We had Walter Hilgers on tuba, and that also is a recording with Pierre Boulez. The chorale on that CD has also become quite famous, but the live concert is even better. I have a recording of that at home. What are your moments?
Well, I might just add a little coda to that, because the Australian viola player, whose name I've forgotten.
Toby Lee.
Yes, Tobias.
Yeah.
Tobias.
I know. I was in a pub with him last night. Yeah.
Well, he said that they had a spontaneous standing ovation in the rehearsal of this guy, and it's never happened before in the history of the orchestra. Right?
Well, it's a bit exaggerated. Erinnerst du das, Hans, an deine erste, dritte Malerprobe, wo das ganze Orchester mit applaudiert hat, oder? Ja.
Nicht wahr? Ja?
Ja? Ja? Schon. Ja.
Okay. For me, was the first time I played, now let me get this, first time I played the Rhenish Symphony. Now,
it's great, isn't it?
Yeah, well, Bournemouth Orchestra, 1951, I was 19, because my birthday's in June. This was in, I don't know, April. The first trombone there, they were good players, I have to say, much better than they deserved. But the best thing of it was that we had this Viennese-trained conductor, Rudolf Schwarz. He was a victim of the Jewish, he was a victim of the Nazis. He got away within 10 minutes of his death, I was told, and was rescued by the Swedish Red Cross, and he married his nurse, having lost his entire family. And he was the conductor of the Bournemouth Municipal Orchestra, which was much better than you'd think. It was founded in 1893, and the conductor of it was Dan Godfrey, and he was a legend in Bournemouth. Anyway, that's the background. The first trombone was Tom Hotchkiss, who was a cop, ex-Sunderland cop, and you could imagine him wearing his cop's hat. And he was a cop too. I mean, he was a policeman. And he had a row with the orchestra manager, who was an elderly horn player called Len Higgs, because on that concert we were going to do what Ridley Schwartz calls a 3 equals. The 3 equals we were going to play, and we needed an extra trombone player. They'd got no money, so they got an ex-Royal Marines trombone player from Christchurch, just up the road, who was called Jim Bishop. That's right, Jimmy Bishop. And he was known as the Bishop of Christchurch. But that's what he was, anyway. He was an extra trombone player, and we wanted some extra rehearsals, and for some reason it hadn't happened. And Tom Hotchkiss was backstage with Rudolf Schwartz. We didn't know what was happening, but the orchestra played 3 movements, and we were going to go to the 4th movement, and we were sitting on the stage. I was sitting in my seat, on the second trombone seat, and suddenly we heard this noise. It sounded a bit like a dog. And very quiet. And it was Schwartz. Get out of this building! Screaming at Tommy Hotchkiss. So, we all went very quiet. And suddenly, Jimmy Bishop comes on the stage. He said, "Here, get over, mate. I'm not playing that bleeding part." And then Schwartz comes on, absolutely immaculate. Mr. Wick, you play first, please. So I had actually 4 seconds notice. And it was extraordinary because that was and we knew that alto trombones existed, but nobody had ever seen one. And I'd got my Bousfield Imperial, and I sort of got through it. And Audrey, my girlfriend, who was later married, we were together for 40 years, and we'd met, and we were going to go out to lunch. I was having practice. Come on, back to the band room, practice, long legs, okay. Because the next day was Bolero. And on the following Tuesday was Brahms 2. And then the day after that was Sibelius 7. And it's rather a lot to play. And I thought, I'm going to do this. And I did. So that was the most memorable occasion.
Can I just say that it's just such a Denis Wick thing to say? And I said to myself, I'm going to do this. And I did. That's very you.
But, I mean, come on.
Yeah, you've got to. When you're faced with something like that, it's just, okay, yeah, it's a strength of character. I mean, that's what we find so much in Vienna. It's the biggest test for us, where we will have a Saturday afternoon, could be Schumann 3, Saturday evening Salome. You might have a Schubert Mass on Sunday morning before you do Schumann 3 again, and then you might go and do Götterdämmerung in the afternoon and evening. And, there's only one thing that gets you through that, and that's strength of character, Although if you've got a good face on, it's good fun, If you haven't, it's hard work, but... Yes. But there are some experiences, I think, as a first trombone player that are kind of indescribable, but they both involve top E flats. One's Berg 3 pieces.
Oh, yes.
And the other is Schumann 3. And when you're up there, it's quite a sobering experience, I have to say. Not that you usually need sobering, because anyone has a drink before that's asking for trouble, but there you go.
That E flat's a marvellous note.
What, the Berg?
Yes.
Don't get it right every time.
That's right. Yes, we
they don't.
We recorded that with Claudio Bardo at Denim Film Studios, because we were going to do Star Wars or whatever it was in the afternoon. It was cheaper to move the conductor than the orchestra. So we were at Denham on the Sunset, and we were going to the Bay Opera 6. For those of you who don't know that piece, it's an extraordinary piece. It's an expose of what's called the 12-tone system. it is not what you expect. But in fact, I find it very romantic music. It is an extraordinary piece. And one of the first things that happens is that the first trombone plays a pianissimo, high E flat, with a little crescendo and diminuendo. Then he does it again, and again, and again.
Can I just ask you at that point? Actually, this is genuine. I do want to ask you, did you ever have that feeling where you practice something like Brahms 1 or Berg 3 pieces or something like that, and it can't possibly go wrong? You've prepared, you've practiced, nothing can possibly go wrong. And just as you put your thing, the mouthpiece on your face, you think, this isn't my face. Which mouthpiece is this? It was like, this cannot possibly work.
See, I've got a trick to fix that.
It's not one of your mouthpieces, is it?
Yeah, but what I do is to buzz on the mouthpiece. I play the note, and I play it loud, and I play it again and again and again. When the orchestra's making a hell of a racket tuning up, nobody can hear it. And I make sure it's there. And I just lift it up. And it is. The story he was telling me...
It's that easy. It's that easy. There you go, you see.
I mean, if you can do it, you can do it. It's not... I mean...
Did you ever have doubts? Did you ever have those demons that crept into your head just before that said, no chance, mate?
No, I used to get cross.
Because I used to fall prey to the demons. Although I have to say, I never did on Berg 3 pieces. Or not yet. I will do it at some point.
But
I haven't
let me
it.
just finish up the story.
Oh,
Stuart Nelson, Oliver's father. When I was your age, I had conductors eating out of my hand. Yes, that's pretty good Manchester, I think. Anyway, he came around and pushed the back on my chair. We'd already done, we'd done one take. We'd done a run through, we'd done a balance test, and we'd done a take. Don't get it right every time. Don't think it's easy.
Dennis, I think that's a great place to end this. We could keep going. I'll give you a call in a couple of months, and we'll have another instalment, okay? Thank you very much. I hope you've all enjoyed that. You should have enjoyed that, because this is probably the biggest part of British trombone playing heritage that we have had or ever will have. So I'm glad it's been recorded, and maybe we should do it again sometime.
Yes. Ian, thanks for that.